I found a lost girl in the forest and took her to my mother's house. My mother has a disability, so I was worried about how she'd react to this unexpected visit. When I returned home, exhausted after a tough day at the office, I was struck by what I saw. As the company leader my father left me, the weight of responsibility was always on my shoulders. Despite the fatigue, my mind was constantly racing with thoughts about the company's future. I'm known for my dedication at work, but outside the office, I'm quite reserved. As I parked my car in the garage of my large house, I sighed heavily. The loneliness of that big, quiet house was overwhelming. The only person I truly connected with was my mother, Sandra. Unfortunately, her health had been rapidly declining due to advanced Alzheimer's. I entered the house, leaving the fading daylight behind. "Mary, I'm home," I called out, surprised to see the housekeeper still there. She usually left by now, but today she was still around. "Mr. Charles, I was waiting to talk about Mrs. Sandra," Mary said, her tone anxious. I sighed, knowing conversations about my mother were never easy. "How is she today?" I asked, bracing myself for the answer. "The same, sir," Mary replied. "But she asked about you several times. I think it would be good for you to spend some time with her, even if she doesn't remember afterward." I agreed, feeling guilty for not spending more time with my mother. "I'll see her now," I said, heading to Sandra's room. When I entered, I saw my mother staring out the window from her armchair. "Mom, it's me, Charles," I said softly, trying to mask my pain. Sandra turned her head slowly, her gaze confused at first, but then a brief flicker of recognition appeared in her eyes. "Charles," she murmured, her voice weak but filled with affection. "Yes, it's me. How are you feeling?" I asked, holding her hand. The conversation was brief and confusing, but these moments were precious, a painful reminder of the past. Leaving her room, I felt the weight of loneliness more acutely. The large house seemed like an echo of memories rather than a home. Sitting on the couch in my room, I reflected on my life. Despite professional success, I felt a deep lack of genuine connection. I wondered if work and caring for my mother were all my life amounted to. I wanted more, but didn't know how or where to find it. After a solitary dinner in the vast dining room, I decided to take a walk in the surrounding forest. The mansion's empty rooms and hallways felt like a prison of my own reflections and loneliness. The forest, on the other hand, offered a refuge, a place where I could breathe and escape my burdens. Wearing a coat, I stepped into the woods. The fresh air immediately eased my mind. The sounds of nature replaced the oppressive silence of the mansion. As I walked aimlessly, I thought about my life, my mother's illness, and the loneliness that consumed me. Despite everything, this peaceful moment was something I longed for. As I followed the trail, the moonlight guided me through the trees. The sound of leaves underfoot and the occasional call of a nightbird were my only companions. I marveled at the simplicity of nature and how, despite owning a successful company, I yearned for basic companionship and understanding. Suddenly, a faint sound interrupted my thoughts. I stopped to listen and heard sobbing. Following the sound, I found a small figure huddled under a tree, a little girl crying alone in the forest. I approached cautiously. "Hey, are you okay? Why are you out here alone?" I asked gently, trying not to scare her. The girl looked up, surprised and wary. "I'm lost," she said, her voice choked with tears. "I don't know how to get back home." Feeling a wave of compassion, I reassured her. "Don't worry, I'll help you find your way back home. What's your name?" I squatted down to her level, trying to seem as non-threatening as possible. "Barbara," she replied, wiping her tears. I extended my hand. "I'm Charles. Come on, I'll take you home." Walking with Barbara by my side, I felt a strange sense of purpose. The concern for this lost girl momentarily took me out of my own troubles. As we walked, I thought about the trail leading to a busy avenue, hoping that might lead us to her home. However, as I looked at Barbara, I noticed her clothes, simple and worn, contrasting sharply with my own circumstances. "Barbara, where is your home? Do you know roughly which direction?" I asked, hoping for a nearby street or neighborhood. Her answer took me by surprise. "My home is a little cardboard house I made. I think it's a bit far from here, in a place where nobody else wants to be. I know where it is but don't quite remember how to get there," she said, a hint of pride in her eyes. Her innocence and pride in her makeshift home left me speechless. I realized the gravity of the situation. She didn't have a traditional home, but rather an improvised shelter vulnerable to many dangers. "Do you live there alone?" Charles asked, trying to hide his concern. "Yes, but I like it," Barbara replied. "I made it all by myself. It even has a window." Charles felt a pang in his heart. He admired Barbara's strength and independence, but the idea of her living alone in such conditions troubled him deeply. "Barbara, it's very cold at night, and it's already late. Would you like to spend the night at my house? Tomorrow, we can check out your cardboard house and see how we can help," Charles suggested, trying to sound inviting without scaring her. Barbara looked at him warily, but with a hint of hope in her eyes. "Are you sure? I don't want to be a bother." Charles nodded with a reassuring smile. "I'm sure, Barbara. It'll be an adventure." When they arrived at the mansion, Barbara's reaction was pure delight. Her eyes widened, and with a smile, she exclaimed, "Wow, this place looks like a fairy tale castle." Charles couldn't help but smile too, moved by her genuine wonder. It was rare for him to see such spontaneity and sincere admiration, and it brought him a joy he hadn't felt in a long time. As they entered, Charles approached Mary, the housekeeper, hoping for her support. Mary's eyebrows shot up in surprise at the sight of Barbara. "Mr. Charles, who is this child?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. Charles quickly explained the situation, hoping for understanding. Instead, Mary responded with alarm. "You can't just bring a stranger into the house. She might be carrying diseases. It could be dangerous for all of us, especially for your mother." Charles was taken aback. He wasn't used to being challenged in his own home, especially when trying to help someone in need. "Mary, I expected more understanding from you. Barbara is just a child who needs help. We're not turning our backs on her," Charles said firmly. Mary argued about the risks, but Charles was resolute. "I've decided, Mary. Please get some clean clothes for Barbara, prepare a warm bath, and make sure she has a decent meal tonight." Mary, clearly displeased, nodded reluctantly. "As you wish, sir." Despite Mary's reaction, Charles knew he was doing the right thing. He turned to Barbara, who watched the exchange with a mix of confusion and gratitude. "Don't worry, we'll take care of you," Charles said, kneeling beside her. Barbara, still amazed by the grandeur of the mansion, smiled back with relief. Later, in her temporary room, Barbara was in awe. The bed felt like a cloud, and the room seemed like a palace. She jumped on the bed, touched the pillows, and laughed with joy. "It's bigger than my cardboard house," she said, running around with delight. After a warm bath and the clean clothes Mary provided, Barbara felt like she was dressed for a party. She devoured the meal with genuine appreciation. When Charles returned to check on her, he found Barbara lying on the bed, her eyes shining with happiness. "Is everything all right?" he asked, feeling a wave of contentment. "Yes, everything is so beautiful and tasty. Thank you, Mr. Charles," she replied with heartfelt sincerity. "Just call me Charles," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. Barbara, now a bit shy, asked, "Can I ask you something? Is this house a real castle?" Charles laughed, charmed by her curiosity. "Not exactly a castle, but it's my home. And tonight, it's your home too." He enjoyed having someone to share his large, lonely house with, even if just for one night. "Would you like me to read you a bedtime story?" he offered, hoping to make her night even more special. Barbara's eyes lit up. I would love that. Charles picked a book from the shelf and began to read. His soft, soothing voice filled the room as Barbara listened attentively. Soon, her eyes grew heavy, and she fell asleep with a peaceful smile. At dawn, Mary burst into the room, throwing open the curtains. Time to get up. Quick. Breakfast is ready, she said briskly. Barbara, still groggy, rubbed her eyes and sleepily asked about Charles. Mary replied coldly, He's already left for work and won't be back until late. Barbara's disappointment was clear. She had hoped to see Charles and perhaps share breakfast with him, but realizing arguing with Mary was pointless, she reluctantly got up to start her day. Barbara got out of bed, still thinking about Charles and the kindness he'd shown her. She brushed her teeth and dressed, feeling awkward in the mansion's formal setting. The housekeeper waited impatiently to take her to breakfast, a new experience for Barbara. At the breakfast table, she marveled at the abundance of food, so different from her usual sparse meals. However, Mary's cold tone made the meal less enjoyable. Mary instructed her, Don't leave this room under any circumstances. I don't have time to watch you. Barbara nodded, pretending to agree, but her mind was already planning an escape. The mansion's secrets beckoned her. After breakfast, Mary took Barbara back to her room. As soon as the door closed, Barbara's excitement and nervousness surged. She pressed her ear against the door, listening to Mary's footsteps fade away. With a determined sigh, she silently opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The mansion was a labyrinth of wonders to Barbara. Each corridor and open door revealed something new. She explored with wide eyes, drawn to mysterious objects and relics of the past. The paintings on the walls seemed to follow her, whispering stories. Her curiosity led her to a slightly open door, Sandra's room. With a mix of curiosity and hesitation, Barbara entered and found Sandra in an armchair, lost in thought. Hello, Barbara said gently. Sandra turned her face, but didn't respond. Barbara introduced herself, but Sandra remained silent, her mind lost in memories. Barbara told her stories about the forest, her cardboard house, and how Charles had found her. Though Sandra didn't react, Barbara felt a strange connection. Restlessness soon took over, and Barbara's curiosity couldn't be contained. She began exploring the room, finding little beyond everyday objects and dusty treasures. Her attention was drawn to a massive wardrobe at the end of the room. With hesitant hands, she opened one of its doors and discovered a treasure, an old guitar and a notebook. The notebook, with its yellowed pages, intrigued her the most. Just as Barbara was about to delve into the notebook, Mary's voice echoed in the hallway. Heart racing, Barbara quickly hid the notebook under her clothes. Mary entered the room and, noticing her, exclaimed, Barbara, what are you doing here? I told you to stay in your room. Mary's irritation was palpable. Barbara shrank back, guilt and fear evident. I was just looking, she mumbled, knowing she had no good excuse. Mary sternly ordered Barbara to return to her room, warning her, It's not safe, and you shouldn't touch things that aren't yours. Barbara was escorted back, and the adventure ended for now. Back in her temporary room, Barbara sat on the bed, clutching the old notebook. It was now a cherished secret, hidden from Mary's view. Her heart was still racing from the recent adventure and discovery. Carefully, she opened the notebook. The pages whispered ancient secrets as a world of memories unfolded before her. It was clear this notebook was Sandra's record of memories, a desperate attempt to hold on to what Alzheimer's had stolen. Sandra had mentioned her condition in a sad and desperate manner. As Barbara flipped through the pages, she discovered Sandra's love for music. Among personal reflections and memories, there were song lyrics, melodies, and sketches of an artistic soul expressing itself through art. Sandra was more than just a mother battling a disease. She was a composer whose emotions and thoughts flowed through her music. Then Barbara came across a dedication to Sandra's son, Charles. The song Sandra had composed for him was simple yet deeply moving. Its lyrics spoke of a mother's love and hope, capturing the essence of Sandra's affection and artistry. After finishing the song, Barbara closed the notebook, deeply touched. The song was a tribute not just to Charles, but also to Sandra's enduring love and creativity. Yet, all these traits had been forgotten. Barbara knew she had found something special and resolved to help, but needed time to figure out how. As night fell, Charles returned from work, eager to see Barbara. He suggested a walk in the forest to reconnect with their recent discovery. For Barbara, this was the perfect moment to address her thoughts. Walking side by side, Barbara gathered the courage to speak. "Charles, your mother was a composer, wasn't she?" she asked softly, trying to sound casual but unable to hide her anxiety. Charles looked surprised and pondered how she knew. "Yes, she was an incredible composer." "How did you find out?" he asked, curiosity in his voice. Barbara stumbled over her words. "I saw a guitar in her room when I got lost. I swear it was an accident. I like music," she added quickly, hoping to divert suspicion. Charles relaxed, smiling. She loved to play. Composing was her way of expressing everything: love, joy, sadness. "She even wrote a song for me when I was little. It went something like this." Charles began humming a melody, the music reflecting eternal love and protection. Barbara listened in silence, the beauty of the song touching her heart. It felt like she was connecting with a piece of Sandra's soul. Moved, Barbara revealed, "I can play the guitar too. I've always loved music." Charles looked at her with new admiration. "Really? How did you learn so young? You must be very talented." Barbara smiled, a mix of sadness and pride in her eyes. "My dad taught me. He taught me to read, to play, to be strong." Her voice carried gratitude and melancholy. Charles noticed the depth of Barbara's connection with her late father. Intrigued, he asked, "And your mother? Did she teach you anything?" Barbara looked down, gathering her thoughts. "Dad said she went to heaven after I was born. He said the angels needed her. She never came back. After Dad got sick, he left too. I had to take care of myself. I didn't want to be a burden." Charles was moved by Barbara's story, touched by her strength in the face of such hardships. "Barbara, your courage is admirable. I'm so sorry for everything you've been through, but you're not alone anymore." The conversation deepened their bond. Barbara felt welcomed and safe with Charles, sensing a new beginning. Charles, inspired by Barbara's resilience, vowed to offer her a better future, a promise of protection and care. After a walk in the forest that helped us both relax and connect, I led Barbara back to the mansion. My mind was heavy with reflections, but her presence lifted my spirits. I carefully helped Barbara settle into bed, making sure she was comfortable and secure in her new temporary home. As I watched her fall asleep, I felt a strong sense of protection and a desire to give her everything life had denied her so far. Leaving her room, I was resolved and determined. In the hallway, I found Mary and couldn't wait to share my thoughts. "Mary, I've been thinking about something important. I want to officially adopt Barbara," I said with clear resolution. Mary, ever practical and a bit skeptical, looked surprised and disapproving. "Adopt her, Charles? Are you sure? That's a huge responsibility, and with everything you already manage, I'm not sure you're up for it." But I was firm. I've never been more certain about anything. Barbara has shown me what's missing in my life. I can offer her a family and a home, and I believe she has a lot to offer me too. Mary looked for any sign of hesitation, but saw only a man ready to change his life for her. "Just think it through," Mary advised. "Adoption isn't something to take lightly. You need to be ready for all the joys and challenges. I know it will be tough, but I'm ready. Barbara deserves a better life, and I want to be part of that. I replied with unwavering conviction. Mary could see the sincerity in my words. The next day, an unexpected event would further cement my decision. At breakfast, Barbara, renewed with determination, asked Mary, "Is there any way to help Mrs. Sandra remember things again?" Her question took Mary by surprise. After a pause, Mary replied, "Mrs. Sandra's illness is Alzheimer's, and it's only getting worse. It's not something we can reverse." Barbara listened with serious intent but remained hopeful. "There has to be something we can do, even a little bit," she insisted. Mary admired Barbara's determination despite knowing the harsh reality. They say that music and old memories can sometimes reach parts of the mind we think are lost, but it's not guaranteed, Mary said, encouraging Barbara's hope. Inspired, Barbara decided to try music. She remembered Sandra's music notebook and the song Charles had hummed. "I'll try with music," she resolved. With hope and a plan, Barbara convinced Mary to let her spend the day with Sandra. In Sandra's quiet room, Barbara began by talking about everyday things, hoping to spark a reaction. When that didn't work, she shifted to Sandra's music. "Mrs. Sandra, I saw a notebook in your room with your beautiful songs. Do you remember writing them?" Barbara asked, her voice full of admiration. She spoke enthusiastically about the lyrics and melodies, hoping to trigger some recognition. Despite Sandra's distant expression, Barbara didn't give up. She believed that music and love could bridge the gap created by the disease. Then I had another idea. I went to my room and grabbed Sandra's diary. I returned to her room with it, hoping that seeing her own lyrics and melodies might help her remember. Carefully, I opened the notebook and showed it to Sandra. "These are your songs," I said, holding it so she could see the writings. "Do you remember writing them? They're very beautiful. I really like them." My voice was full of hope as I began reciting the verses. Despite my heartfelt effort, Sandra's reaction was the same as before: nothing. She remained still, her distant gaze seeming to look through the notebook and the walls of the room to somewhere only she knew. This lack of response didn't dampen my spirits. Instead, it made me more determined to find something that could reach her heart in a way that words alone couldn't. I decided to check the large wardrobe in Sandra's room again. My eyes lit up when I found a box full of musical score notebooks next to a guitar. It was like discovering a hidden treasure, the keys to the melodies that matched the lyrics I'd read. I picked up one of the notebooks, flipping through the pages of musical notes. Each page was a potential bridge to Sandra's dormant consciousness. I thought, this might work. If words couldn't reach Sandra, maybe the music itself could. Excited by the possibility, I compared the song titles in the scores with those in Sandra's diary. When I found matches, a mix of anxiety and excitement took over me. I took Sandra's guitar and tried to play and sing the songs, hoping the combination of melody and lyrics could awaken a memory. Despite my efforts and growing confidence, Sandra's reaction remained unchanged. I realized that perhaps my unfamiliarity with the exact way to sing her songs was preventing the connection I sought. But I didn't give up. I kept trying different songs, adjusting my voice to match the melody of the guitar. As the day turned to afternoon, then evening, my fingers began to hurt and my throat dried out, but I refused to be discouraged. Each chord was a silent plea for Sandra to return, even just for a moment, to the world that music had created. When night fell, I finally had to stop. Exhausted and frustrated, I sat on the floor, letting the guitar rest. Just then, a flash of inspiration struck me. The melody that Charles had shared with me in the forest, the one his mother had composed for him, came back to me. It was the one song where I knew the exact rhythm. With renewed determination, I sifted through the scores, eagerly searching for that melody. Finally, among the yellowed sheets, I found it, the precious score dedicated to Charles. I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of nervousness and hope, and positioned my fingers on the guitar. I began to play the first notes, the melody flowing more easily this time, each chord filled with emotional depth. As I sang the verses I had memorized, Sandra's eyes showed a different sparkle. For a moment, the fog around her mind seemed to lift, and she slowly turned her head toward me, as if waking from a long dream. Her eyes locked onto mine, a fleeting recognition crossing her gaze. Meanwhile, Charles was returning home, his thoughts on me and the small joys my presence brought. When he noticed my absence from my room, concern set in, and he hurried to find out where I was. He went to Mary, looking anxious. "Mary, have you seen Barbara?" "She's not in her room." Mary, who was tidying up, looked at him calmly. "She's in Mrs. Sandra's room. She spent the entire day there trying to help her recover." "Recover?" Charles asked, a mix of curiosity and concern in his voice. The idea of me spending the whole day with Sandra left him both worried and curious. Mary sighed, choosing her words carefully. "She spent the whole day playing the guitar and singing songs. She probably saw the diary and the scores and decided to sing. It's a beautiful thing to see. Come, I'll show you." Mary led Charles down the hallway to Sandra's room. As they walked, Charles felt a mix of anxiety and hope, wondering if I had found a way to reach his mother, who had been closed off for years. "Mary, did it really work? Did my mother react in any way?" Charles asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Mary gave him a serious look. "Not that I know of. The last time I checked on the two misses, Sandra was the same as always. But what matters is the girl's intention." Charles sighed, feeling a slight discouragement from the lack of expectation. But as they approached the door, a soft melody and two voices harmonizing reached his ears. He stopped, immediately recognizing his mother's voice in a song he never expected to hear again. His heart raced with surprise, hope, and a deep, unnamed emotion. Driven by hope, Charles hurried down the hallway, following the sound that seemed to call him. When he reached the door, he saw a scene he thought was impossible. His mother, Sandra, singing with Barbara. The music, once composed by his mother for him in the past, now connected generations and memories. Tears streamed down Charles's face, each drop carrying years of longing, love, and pain. Seeing his mother awake and engaged, even briefly, brought immense relief and indescribable joy. Barbara's presence had unlocked this connection to the past, reinforcing Charles's decision to make her part of his family. He stood at the door, the music filling his heart. When the song ended, Sandra turned to him with a rare glint of lucidity in her eyes. "Charles, my dear, stop crying. You look as if you've been pinched," she said, her voice fragile but clear. Her unexpected words only intensified Charles's tears. He smiled through them, a smile filled with years of repressed pain and love. Overcome with emotion, Charles rushed to hug his mother, enveloping her in an embrace that symbolized both loss and reunion. Barbara, though not fully understanding the depth of his emotions, was moved by the shared tears. Mary, too, tried to hide her own tears, but felt the impact of the reunion. Sandra's moment of clarity was a precious gift amidst her illness, but it was fleeting. Charles watched with gratitude and sadness as her light slowly faded, returning her to the silence of recent years. Before leaving, he tenderly kissed her forehead, a farewell to that brief moment of connection. Turning to Barbara, who watched with pride, Charles extended his hand and said, "Let's go for a walk in the forest, Barbara. We need some fresh air." Barbara wiped her tears and nodded. As they walked under the trees, the silence between them was filled with the sound of their footsteps. It was a comfortable silence, a space to process the day's emotions. Finally, driven by gratitude, Charles broke the silence. "You did something amazing today, Barbara. I don't know how to thank you for giving me that moment with my mother." Barbara, holding his hand tightly, smiled shyly. "I just wanted to help. Seeing you two like that was beautiful. I'm glad I could do it." Charles looked at her, his smile reflecting his happiness. The strength of the moment, shared with his mother, was still vivid in his heart, reinforcing a decision that would change their lives forever. Barbara. He began with tender seriousness. I've been thinking a lot about us and how you came into my life unexpectedly. This has given me an idea. Would you like to hear it? Barbara, curious and a bit anxious, looked at him. What idea is that, Charles? Charles faced her directly, wanting her to see the sincerity and love in his eyes. Barbara, how would you feel if I adopted you? If you officially became my daughter? Barbara's reaction was immediate. Her eyes widened with surprise and then sparkled with pure joy. Really? You want to be my new daddy? She could barely contain her excitement. Yes, seriously, Charles replied, his smile mirroring hers. I would love that. You're already part of my family in my heart, but I want it to be official for everyone to know. With a cry of joy, Barbara leaped into Charles's arms, hugging him tightly. I would love that. Being a princess and living in a castle is going to be amazing. And having a daddy again. Her voice, once altered by emotion, now brimmed with happiness as the future unfolded before her. As we continued our walk through the forest, a new bond formed between us. We both felt a lightness and hope we hadn't experienced in a long time. For Charles, deciding to adopt Barbara was a step toward a future full of possibilities and love. For Barbara, it meant the promise of a home and a family, a longing she had since losing her own. United by music, fate, and the promise of adoption, we returned to the mansion, ready to start a new chapter in our lives. In a world where hope often seems fragile, Barbara and Charles's story reminds us of the transformative power of love, determination, and compassion. In the weeks following that unforgettable day, Charles worked tirelessly to make Barbara's adoption official. The speed of it all showed not only his determination, but also how right the decision was for both of them. Now officially part of the family, Barbara thrived under Charles's care. The mansion, once quiet and lonely, buzzed with the joy and energy of the young girl. Her eagerness to learn and sharp intelligence made Charles proud, and even Mary found new purpose in supporting Barbara's studies. Barbara's musical moments with Sandra, though brief, brought comfort and joy to everyone. For Sandra, these moments were a small healing for the wounds left by her disease. For Charles, they were proof that true love endures despite the challenges of Alzheimer's. Our days at the mansion were transformed into times of learning, music, shared laughter, and quiet gratitude. Charles, Barbara, Mary, and even Sandra in her lucid moments formed a family united by heart, not just blood. Their story shows that even in unexpected circumstances, family can be found and formed. The adoption of Barbara brought new life to all of us, proving that even in adversity, happiness, love, and a sense of belonging are possible. Our mansion, now filled with love and joy, celebrated life each day thanks to the strength of love and the beauty of forming a family. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and join our community by subscribing to the channel. Your support motivates us to share exciting stories almost every day. Don't miss the next incredible story displayed on your screen. We deeply appreciate your support and hope to see you soon.